Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is June 6th, 2016, and we're going to talk about a number of different topics tonight. Of course, we're going to talk about the Syrian situation, international foreign policy situation, and we're also going to talk about the drug war. We're going to talk about mercenaries. We need to mention the Blackwater Academy mercenaries, and, of course, the political issue in Napa County, California, because the elections are coming up on June 7th, so tomorrow. And if you're in California, this is important to listen up in regards to that situation. So we'll talk about that. Now, if you're joining us tonight for the first time, you can catch Truth on the Tracks every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at ucy.tv. You can access the show's personal website at ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. Now, if you're interested in my work, you can follow my work at activistpost.com, naturalblaze.com, eraofwisdom.org, and, of course, brandonturbeville.com. And if you're interested in my work specifically, I highly encourage you to go to brandonturbeville.com. That is the website where I post all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, all of the archives of this show. Everything that is relevant to my work is available at brandonturbeville.com. And speaking of that, last week I mentioned that the bookstore would be up and running on the website by the next time you heard the show. And it is. Finally, we got the books up on the website in a manner that's it's easy to order them and it's more affordable. So you don't have to pay exorbitant shipping in order to receive the book. So we've got The Difference It Makes, 36 Reasons Hillary Clinton Should Never Be President, Codex Alimentarius, The End of Health Freedom, The Road to Damascus, The Anglo-American Assault on Syria, and 7 Real Conspiracies up in the bookstore now. Now, we've got Dispatches from a Dissident, Volumes 1 and 2, that we're eventually going to get up on the website. We don't have that up just yet. We're still working on getting those books up, and they will be up in the near future. But if you're interested in buying the books, please go to brandonturbeville.com, click on Books or the store, and that will take you to the relevant areas to buy those books. If you want to support me, you can do that. And again, there's a lot of good information in those books, so keep that in mind. Now, tonight, we're going to talk about a number of different issues. Let me get into the issue in, well, let me mention the vaccines first. I just wanted to point this out. We did an article on this. It was posted at Natural Blaze. It's up at brandonturbeville.com now. But Dr. Rachel Ross, a popular TV show called The Doctors, is now stating that she feels like an ass because she misunderstood vaccines, and that's her own words, right? She said this at a conference. There was actually not a conference; it was the movie premiere of Vaxxed, and she was asked by an audience member about how much information she had actually received in medical school regarding vaccines, and she responded. Well, actually, the question coming from the audience was, what were you taught specifically about vaccines? How much information did you get on ingredients, on studies of them all given together? And how much information did you actually receive that prepared you for that? And Ross responded that she says, they don't teach us about the ingredients. They don't teach us about the studies behind it. I think what they teach us is that they've always been given and that they cure diseases and that you just do it. And honestly, you know, from the outside looking in, as I'm saying this to all you people, I almost feel like an ass. And she goes further, and that video is embedded in the article. So we have a nationally known medical doctor, television personality, saying that medical doctors in general misunderstand vaccines. She misunderstood vaccines, and credit to her. This is the kind of doctors you can respect, because if they make a mistake, everybody makes mistakes, but this one can admit it and then move on, having learned a lesson, which means that ego is not in control of every possible decision in her life. So that sets her apart from most. Now, let's talk about an issue in North Carolina. The issue about kratom. the wherever there's a good thing, the police state is never far behind, and generally, regardless of what that is, there's an attempt by either uniformed thugs trying to throw peaceful people into cages, or bureaucrats and parasites in suits who are trying to work together with the corporate hawks to make sure that there's profit and panic and punishment enough to go around for everybody. That's what's happening in North Carolina now regarding kratom. Now, if you're listening and you don't know what kratom is, it's called Mitragina speciosa, right? That's the Latin scientific classification for it. It's a tropical evergreen tree in the coffee family, which is native to Southeast Asia. And kratom is not an opiate. It can be used to manage pain and anxiety and even alcohol dependence. And it is possible to use kratom recreationally, but the effects are generally too mild to classify it as anything that resembles a drug, right? This is not really a drug. This is a plant to begin with. It doesn't have the effects necessarily of a drug. But that's not going to stop Senator Tom McInnes, that North Carolinians will be well aware of, and other members of the North Carolina Senate for attempting to make sure that nobody is able to alleviate their pain, to break addiction, to relieve stress, or even entertain themselves through natural means for recreational purposes. Oh my God, doesn't that sound like terrorism? Somebody actually enjoying themselves. That sounds like Al-Qaeda to me. Also, all of this is being promoted by the drug persecutors and the drug pushers. And when I say the drug pushers, I'm talking about the ones with degrees and lab coats that can push all manner of dread drugs on to the general public, to the point that we have 20% of the American public, I believe now, on some type of antidepressant or psychological drug. But if it's kratom, if it's a plant that doesn't have these massive side effects, then it's the end of the world, and we have to call in the police state and the goons and the guns and the prison cells because someone is consuming a plant. In the freest country of the world, no less. Remember, it's the greatest country in the world because nobody's as free as we are. We can't be able to consume a plant, but we're the freest country in the world. But we have this bill, SB 830, filed in the Senate by McInnes on May 10th, 2016. That bill will add kratom to the list of controlled substances. If it's passed, it will also, appropriate funds for the State Bureau of Investigation, so that the SBI will be able to open up another front in this costly and tragic and counterproductive, stupid war on drugs. And Senator McInnes and his SB 830 supporters, they might find mass incarceration and nonviolent people being thrown into prison cells an attractive venue for North Carolina, but most of us don't. And I want to encourage the listeners here, particularly the North Carolina residents, especially my North Carolina listeners. You need to email and call the members of the Senate Healthcare Committee for the North Carolina Senate and demand that this idiotic, stupid, insulting bill be abandoned. Right? There are a number of ways you can do this. The first way I would encourage you is to go to my website and look up North Carolina Files Bill to place kratom on controlled substances list. North Carolina Files Bill to place kratom on controlled substances list. And in that article, you'll find a number of avenues, right? We've got the lists of the senators. For instance, McInnes, his co-sponsor. We've got their phone number and their email address. We've also got the email address of the Senate Healthcare Committee, basically, each individual, right, the co-chairman and the other members of the committee. And then we've got all the emails of the members of the North Carolina Senate. So it's all there. In fact, we've hyperlinked them all, so you could actually go in and just click on it, right? You don't even have to type it into your email browser. Just click on it, send a short email. Now, the American Kratom Association, a.k.a., you can go to their website at americankratom.org, and kratom is spelled Kratom, so americankratom.org, And you can also go to the North Carolina chapter on Facebook. So that's the American Kratom Association North Carolina. So you can find them on Facebook. You can also find American Kratom on Facebook. But you can follow them, go to the website, and you'll find the same list. And they'll also keep you up to date on all the events, all the action alerts, and provide you with a wealth of information about the kratom substance. So go to their website, but right now this is an action alert. We're calling on the listeners to this show to get active, right? This is an opportunity for you to do something. You don't even have to leave the house. You don't really have to put yourself out there. Just send an email to the senator and to the senators and the committee members, and let them know that you don't want this bill passed. And if you have trouble writing, you can call. And if you'd rather write, but you don't quite know what to say, there is a sample letter there. American Kratom Association provided a letter template that you can use when you contact these members of the Senate. So you can use that templates right there in the article. So do that. And please, especially if you're in the North Carolina area, if you're in North Carolina and you're a listener to this show, go get that article and make the relevant calls and emails. So please do that. That's important. Now, the other issue we have is Napa County, California. Tomorrow is the election day. Now, I say tomorrow. This show is actually being recorded on June 4th. So we're going to be skipping a day or two in terms of news and information. But if you're listening to the show on Monday night, then it's tomorrow when the election is. And we have a guy running for the Napa County Board of Supervisors. His name is James Hinton, Hinton. He was on this show. He's been on the show twice, actually, and his platform is based on many aspects of some of the things that I've been promoting, right? I recently had an article written about him called Hinton is a Fighter on Important Issues that was published in the Napa Valley Register, and I tried to discuss his track record. So if you're in California, particularly if you're in Napa County, I want you to listen up. You would do well to examine the stated positions of the candidates that you've got running. You have 4 people running for District 2 of your County Board of Supervisors. And you've got 3 of them that seem to be, one of them, of course, is status quo from the word go, right? He's received tons of money from big corporations and other organizations, and you've got 2 other ones that are obviously status quo, but you've got one that stands out more than the rest. Now, James is the only candidate there who has consistently spoken out about the dangers of genetically modified food, the necessity of labeling GMOs at the state and county level. He's spoken out about that for quite some time. In fact, he's been fighting for clean food long before he was a candidate in the race for the County Board of Supervisors. He's been raising the issue of GMOs in prior political action for years, and he's done so out of his own commitment and his own belief that everybody should have access to healthy food. This was not a political decision. His record is clear on GMOs, and you can see that his position is long-standing. You can go to the internet and see that. Now, if some of you remember the SB 277 vaccine bill in California, then you'll remember the vitriol of the debate, right? And you'll realize that it was not something that a politician would do to come out against SB 277 and expect to really gain support, especially in the media. But James did come out against SB 277. He came out for vaccine rights, for individual rights. He did not support SB 277. He could have remained silent and just kept pushing on and went under the radar, but he didn't. He took a stand on principle. He opposed the bill. The other political platform, he's advocated for the adoption of an organic local school food program in Napa County schools, like the Conscious Kitchen approach at the Sausalito Marin City School District. It's a very good idea. It's been experimented with before. It's had amazing results. And we just talked about the drug war, right? And we've got the other candidates in the Board of Supervisors that do appear to be content with the status quo of the way that the drug war is prosecuted in Napa County and the position of the county when it comes to medical marijuana and other cannabis policies. Hinton has always publicly supported the legal use of medical marijuana and advocated an end to the drug war. He's been fighting for an end to the persecution of medical marijuana growers, the persecution of dispensaries, persecution of patients, both before and during the campaign, right? He's done this before he was running for County Board of Supervisors. He's done this as a private citizen. He's been active in the defense of Hakeem Brown. That is the medical cannabis cultivator who was recently found not guilty in a jury trial, but a guy who was obviously being harassed by the police state thugs and the district attorney. James is the only candidate in the Board of Supervisors race that supports raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour. He is not the choice of big money. You can look at his campaign budget for that. You can tell that he's not the choice of big money in Napa. So there's no reason to see why no surprise to see why so many people in Napa County do view him as a breath of fresh air. I should also mention that even in California, James is pro-Second Amendment. He is not an anti-gunner. He's not a gun grabber at all. So you can check him out. He'll be on the ballot, Napa County Board of Supervisors, District 2, on June 7th. Now, California, for the rest of the listeners, has, I forgot the name of this, what they call it, it's an open primary. And that's not what they mean when they say an open primary in South Carolina, for instance. What they mean is that everybody runs in the primary. Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Greens, Libertarians. And the top two move to the next round in the general. So you could have 5 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and a Libertarian. The vote could be split between the Libertarian and 1 Republican, and in the general election there would be a Libertarian versus a Republican. That's how California does the elections. So what James needs to do is to at least either be number 1 or be number 2. And this is an important day, right, for the people of Napa County. So June 7th is the date that you should go out and cast your vote and make your voice heard in this race. And of course, June 7th is also the day that Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton square off. And I've said on many occasions, this is not an endorsement of Bernie Sanders. Bernie is not a good candidate. We don't support democratic socialism or any version of socialism. We don't support Israel, and we don't support gun grabbing and race baiting and that sort of thing. But Hillary Clinton is clearly the biggest danger in this situation. So you can make your judgment based on that. But I definitely wanted to mention the James Hinton campaign. Now, and again, just to be extra clear to anybody who's listening to this show, not an endorsement of Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump, for that matter. We don't support fascism, we don't support democratic socialism, and we don't support institutionalized psychopathy either. So that is our position on that. Now let's look at the foreign policy situation. Let's jump over to Yemen real quick. I mentioned some time ago, we discussed the issue of mercenaries being used in Yemen under contract by the United Arab Emirates. And these were mercenaries that were were from Blackwater, it's also known as Academy. And they were, again, contracted by feudal monarchies in the Gulf like the United Arab Emirates. On December 9th of 2015, we had a number of reports coming from media outlets like Press TV, Telesort TV, Al-Manar, etc., even coming out of Al-Bawaba and Colombia, where it was being revealed that around 15 Blackwater mercenaries were killed in a battle with the Houthis in Yemen. And Al-Masirah, that's Yemen's Arabic language website, was reporting that the commander-in-chief of the firm's operation in Yemen, there was a Mexican national, was killed in the Al-Amari district of the Taiz province. Now, we had Press TV reporting that a number of British, French, and Australian advisors and commanders, also 6 Colombian soldiers, were killed. In late November 2015, it was reported that around 1,800 former Latin American soldiers have been recruited by a program that was managed by Blackwater founder Eric Prince, and they were being trained in the desert of the United Arab Emirates so they could be used against the Houthis, and it was estimated that about 450 of those soldiers were from Colombia, the country, for my South Carolina listeners. The New York Times reported that the UAE had dispatched about a few hundred Colombian mercenaries to Yemen, and El Tiempo said the presence of the mercenaries was suggesting that 100 Colombian soldiers had entered Yemen in October, it's 2015, and that was also corroborated by the New York Times. Columbia Reports, the Colombian website, the Colombian news agency, stated that the mercenaries were being paid around $1,000 more per week than what they could have been paid as part of the Emirati deployment if they were Emirati soldiers. Right? If they over the triple amount what they would have been making as members of the Colombian military. So it's the contracts there are for about 3 months on the front line, but as you can see, it's decentivizing actual military service on the national sense, and it's incentivizing getting training based on the government taxpayer dime and then going to become a contractor where you can make 3 times as much. That's an interesting development. I think you can see much more of that in the near future as we go along this global system. Now, back to what is happening there. The Colombian troops that were in Yemen back in November, right? This is coming from November, but they were apparently handpicked from a brigade of about 1,800 Latin American soldiers that were training at the Emirati military base. They were apparently woken up in the middle of the night for the deployment, and they were brought out of their barracks, and the bunkmates didn't even know they were leaving. They were issued dog tags, given ranks in the Emirati military, and the ones that were left behind are now being trained to use grenade launchers, armored vehicles that the Emirati troops are currently using in Yemen. Now, Emirati officials had made a point of recruiting Colombian troops over other Latin American soldiers because they consider the Colombians more battle-tested in guerrilla warfare because they've spent decades of fighting the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or the FARC, in the jungles there. Now, the exact mission of the Colombians in Yemen is still murky, still unclear, and one person involved in that whole project said it could be weeks before they saw regular combat, but they'll join a few hundred Sudanese soldiers that Saudi Arabia has recruited to fight as part of the coalition. Now, a recent United Nations report cited claims that about 400 Eritrean troops might be embedded with the Emirati soldiers in Yemen as well. So that if that's true, that would actually violate a United Nations resolution that restricts Eritrean military activities. But these things don't apply to everybody. Some countries are more equal than others. The United States has also been participating in this campaign in Yemen, by the way. They've been providing logistical support. They've been providing airborne refueling to the GCC countries that are conducting the airstrikes. The Pentagon has sent a team to Saudi Arabia to provide targeting intelligence to the militaries. They can use that for the airstrikes. And the New York Times, again, reported that the training program and the other third world mercenaries that the Gulf states are using has been taking place since as far back as 2010. Apparently, Colombian troops are being trained in the Emirates since the project began in 2010, so that the Colombian government even tried to broker an agreement with the Emirati officials to stop this program because so many soldiers, Colombian soldiers, were headed to the Gulf And it was actually creating a situation where the Colombians didn't have as many troops, the quality of troops that they needed. So we had a lot of the recruitment of these troops in Colombia being done by Global Enterprises, a Colombian company that's run by former Special Forces commander named Oscar Garcia Batey, and he's also co-commander of the Brigade of Colombian Troops in the Emirates as part of the force that's deployed to Yemen. Now, back to Blackwater, or at least to Eric Prince. There's evidence he was involved in setting up the program early on. The firm is denying ties to the program, at least they were denying it in 2015. But foreign media outlets disagree on this, and they also disagree on the level which Blackwater and Prince's firm are involved. That's a matter that's actually for debate. All this is very murky. This is information that we have that's coming out that's, again, very murky. The fighters are mercenaries. That's beyond doubt. But we've got a report coming from Tony Toe. Right, this is the Al Masdar Yemen correspondent. He's brought another piece of the puzzle being provided now in terms of the mission and methodology of the Blackwater Saudi Arabian cooperation. And Toe is reporting that a Yemeni news organization has revealed that a company doing the actual hiring of mercenaries from Blackwater to fight in Yemen is Reflex Responses Management Consultancy LLC. It's RRMC LLC, right? And that's an Emirati-owned company that specializes in hiring foreign mercenaries and fighters for the military, the Emirati military. And according to this source, we have Major General Isa Saif Mohammed al-Mazari. This is an Emirati officer. He's the individual that's most heavily involved with the deployment of these mercenaries. And al-Masira also is reporting that a contract between the Reflex Response company and the UAE government in March 2015, which was worth about $529 million around the beginning of the Yemeni crisis. So it's clear that the Saudi and the Emirates, or the Emiratis, are grasping at straws within their reach so they can shore up their faltering military campaign in Yemen and make up for the weakness of their own military forces. That's been repeatedly demonstrated over and over again in Yemen, and that the GCC countries are nothing but paper tigers. So that's been profoundly clear. Now, I want to jump over to something else also. We need to go to Syria now. You know, it's ironic that Obama would actually go recently to Vietnam and state, I think it was May 24th, he went to Hanoi, as it was part of a conference gathering there where he said, big nations should not bully smaller ones. Disputes should be resolved peacefully. This is something that is incredibly not only ironic, but hypocritical, that he would go to a country where the United States had bullied that country for over a decade to say that no big countries should bully smaller ones, as the United States bullies Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Pakistan, Libya, all of these countries. Who isn't the United States attempting to bully? The United States is even attempting to bully Russia and China, but apparently the bully has realized that one or two of those countries might hit back, and that's what's holding the United States back. But nevertheless, what an amazing amount of hypocrisy that took place at that conference. Now, in Syria, let's just look at a news item real quick. If anybody had any doubt that these military personnel that were sent to Syria by Obama were doing much more than just providing training and anti-ISIS intelligence to the Syrian moderate rebels, remember the moderate terrorists, and the YPG, which are, I guess better, but not much better. We're not a huge fan of the YPG here. But we recently saw photograph and video evidence of the U.S. soldiers wearing emblems of the YPG on their shoulders. And this seems to indicate that these guys are doing much more than just supporting them in the traditional sense of training and giving them intelligence, but supporting them in the sense of giving them combat support. So this is something that was actually indicated by Obama when he announced that he was sending an additional number of U.S. Special Forces to Syria, which are publicly and officially up to 300 now. Now, the State Department spokesman Mark Toner declined to specify where the Special Forces were operating, but Al-Masdar is reporting that they are operating near Raqqa, and that they're operating with the YPG and the Syrian Democratic Forces. And that's an organization that's made up of Kurds, Arabs, but basically it's a loose collection of terrorists, right? Terrorists and Kurdish forces. Some of the Kurdish forces are actually fanatics. Some of them just want their own state and will kill whoever they're able to kill in order to achieve that goal. The SDF and the YPG have committed atrocities against Christians and Assyrians and other minorities in Syria over the last 5 years. They've both been accused of that, and that's been public news over the last few years. Now, the display of the YPG emblems and the revelation that it was international tension, I guess we should say. Turkey started registering major complaints over the issue because Turkey is publicly condemning the use of the emblems. It's because it's the YPG, right? It's the Kurds. The U.S. military admitted that the soldiers were working with the YPG and the SDF since it stated that the troops would be ordered to remove those emblems. But Turkey is quite upset that the Kurds would be cooperated with in any way. It seems like Turkey's more upset that the emblems were being used than the actual association between the YPG and the U.S. forces, which is quite bizarre. But it's an organization that Turkey sees as an offshoot of the PKK, and it largely it is connected to the PKK. But we went through the Kurdish issue some time ago, so if you go back to the archives, you can find that out. What's interesting is there's a video of an American soldier. A camera walks up to him and he says, "Let me tell you something. I'm from the United States of America, and I say kill them all." So it's unclear if he was referring to ISIS. Yeah, fine, all right, whatever, kill them all. But if he's referring to Syrians in general, and given the unfortunate outlook of many of the people joining the military now, and the amount of brainwashing that they're being given, it's up for question, right? Did he mean ISIS, or did he mean Syrians in general? We'd have to ask him, I guess. But regardless, that's the development in that regard. Now, we have this disease spreading across Syria, cutaneous leishmaniasis. It's a parasitic disease that is allegedly being spread by infected sandflies in the area, although the disease is described as being tropical. Syria is not tropical. But the disease is quite awful, right? It causes open wounds, purple scarring, gross disfigurement of its victims. And you can see pictures of this. Just type in cutaneous leishmaniasis. You can see these pictures. And it's being shared by the Daily Mail. It's being shared by the mainstream media all over because, well, we'll get into why. But basically what the issue is, it's that they say the sandflies only operate in humid temperatures, and the refugee settlements in Nizip in southern Turkey have reported several hundred cases. Dr. Walid Al-Salim was one of the authors of the research that brought this out into the public awareness from the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. Said it's a very bad situation. The disease has spread dramatically in Syria, but also in countries like Iraq, Lebanon, Turkey, and even into southern Europe, with refugees coming in. There are thousands of cases in the region, but it is still underestimated because no one can count the exact number of people affected. When people are bitten by a sandfly, which are tiny and smaller than a mosquito, it can take anything between 2 to 6 months to have the infection. So someone might have picked it up in Syria, but then they may have fled into Lebanon or Turkey or even into Europe as they seek refuge. Prior to the outbreak of war, there was good control of diseases, parasites, and sandflies, but when the conflict started, no one cared. Conditions worsened, and the health system broke down, which has created an ideal environment for disease outbreaks. Well, it wasn't that no one cared. It was that no one was able to provide adequate care because the United States and Israel and the GCC and NATO had overrun the country with monkeys and savage terrorists that destroyed the infrastructure. And not to mention the Western sanctions that were imposed on Syria. That alone would have made it difficult to treat, and that alone would have caused it to increase. The World Health Organization does categorize this as neglected, but this is a sort of a worldwide neglected disease, right? It's actually kind of rare, but common enough, but it's not something that's an epidemic, not yet. Between 2000 and 2012, they said they only had 6 reported cases of the disease in Lebanon. In 2013, there were 1,033. So that's 96% of them occurred among the displaced Syrian refugees, according to the Lebanese Ministry of Health. We also had Turkey, Jordan, Eastern Libya, and Yemen reporting hundreds of cases. And with Yemenis migrating to Saudi Arabia, the fear is the disease might spread there too. The Saudis, of course, I would imagine, would be panicking. That might interfere with their rampant orgies or cocaine gambling binges. So there could even be refugees with the diseases who've reached Europe. So now the Europeans are starting to worry, of course, right, because it's in their backyard. Now, the Syrian Ministry of Health said the number of cases of the disease went from 23,000 before the war to 41,000 in 2013, so almost doubled in that time period. Now, the cases of the disease have appeared all across Syria. They seem to be concentrated in Palestine and Israel, as well as southern Lebanon, if you look at the maps. Now, if you read the reports, it says it's in ISIS-held areas in Syria, but that's not what you see when they show you the maps. It actually shows that it's in some of it's ISIS-held territory, some of it's rebel-held territory, some of it's government-held territory, but Palestine, Israel, and Lebanon seem to be hit the hardest. This is what the question is, right? It's unclear whether or not the disease itself is becoming an epidemic and a pandemic, or if the Western media is simply using it to stir up humanitarian concerns to justify some type of intervention in Syria, or even panic over the Syrian refugees. So the level of emergency may be debatable. The disease is undoubtedly present in Syria, but we don't know what they're doing. Why are they reporting this as an issue? Now, the reason this disease is making a comeback is directly a result of Western policies of destabilization and sanctions and proxy war. That's what has created the conditions for this disease. So if any of the listeners are out there thinking, is he really blaming a disease like cutaneous leishmaniasis on the United States? Yes, I am blaming that disease on the United States. It is directly the fault of the United States and NATO and their policies of destabilization that have destroyed the infrastructure and the health facilities and the sanitation and the living standards of the Syrian people. This, by the way, is a bigger issue, not just for Syria. This is, an example of how sanitation crises, health infrastructure crises, basically the collapse of infrastructure leads to disease, right? All kinds of diseases that are deadly, diseases that were not deadly before but are deadly now. And in Syria, you have an extreme case of austerity. You have a country that was becoming highly developed, becoming more developed, and in a period of 5 years, many of its hospitals are completely gone. All hospitals are overburdened. The cities, the coastal cities, for instance, under the government-held territory, because the people flee to the government, are absolutely, the cities are overpopulated because people from the rural areas and from other cities where the Western-backed terrorists take over have to flee. Now, they don't go to flee to Erdogan's Turkey, and they don't go to flee to Jordan's deserts or to the precious Israelis. They don't flee, if they can help it, to Iraq. They flee to government-held territories in Syria. And this is where they tend to go. But with all of those people crammed into such a small space that was not capable of holding them all, you have the spread of disease. Now, if you go over here to the west, you see that what happened in Syria as an extreme case, you look at the west and you see a gradual decline in living standards. You see a gradual decline in the availability of health care. You can add that to these ridiculous laws like the Obamacare mandate and the rationing of care. You add that to the situation where you already have a lack of availability of health care. Then you add the rationing of actual care. And then you add the incompetence of much of the medical system and the fact that so many hospitals are actually being closed. Look at the sanitation issue. The United States infrastructure is falling apart. We are a shell of our former selves. What is happening to Syria in 5 years, and I don't mean to say that it's going to be exactly like Syria with the bombings and the collapsed buildings, but what I am saying is that you will see gradual austerity across the West. You're seeing that now. You've already seen it. You want to look to the future, you can look to Detroit, right? This is post-industrial living standards, and therefore you see the increase for disease. Never let the pro-vax fanatics tell you that the reason diseases are increasing is because more and more people are not vaccinating. The reason diseases are increasing are twofold. One is because people like them who constantly shoot their kids up with aluminum and other toxic substances. But the reason diseases are increasing, and we're starting to see a slight uptick in diseases that we had considered eradicated or considered rare or considered non-deadly that are not so now, is because we are in a worldwide economic depression and our infrastructure is going down the tubes. If you want to have high living standards, if you want to make sure that your country, your culture doesn't have to deal with measles or polio, then what you need to do is make sure you have 21st century living standards and people are able to have access to decent food and to decent medical care, and that it's not a situation where they're working 2 or 3 jobs. This is what we need to focus on. And I'm bringing that up because it's time that the West actually takes a look at this, not only in terms of what it's doing to Syria, but in terms of what is happening back home, because this is something that's going to come home to roost. Now, we have about 15 minutes left or so in the show, and I wanted to pick up where I left off last week. I was talking about the Bashar al-Assad reform program and how that was received and how he was received at the early point in Syria before the destabilization began in earnest in 2011. And I didn't get to go all the way through it, but I got such a positive response from the listeners last week, I figured I would come back and revisit it. And in the middle part of this show, or toward the end of this show, we could try to cover some more of it and try to finish where I was at. Now, for those of you who are just joining the show for the first time, I'd encourage you to go back last week and listen to the second half of the show and listen to what we discussed in terms of the reform program. But I'm just going to pick back up where I left off. Now, the Western mainstream press is engulfed in this psychotic attempt to portray Bashar al-Assad as a monster and as some type of dictator or authoritarian strongman. But the problem with their demonization plan is that he is extremely popular in Syria. Now, the Qatar monarchy, right, the petro-monarchy in Qatar is and has been for some time an open enemy of Syria, and they put billions of dollars into the Islamist armed groups that are running rampant in Syria today. But their own media channel and the polls that were conducted by that media channel have had to acknowledge Assad's popularity. For instance, in January 2011, Al Jazeera, that's Qatari-owned, concluded that a revolution in Syria was unlikely because Assad was so popular. Now, they said there was authoritarian rule, but this is a quote, "Factors such as relatively popular president and religious diversity make an uprising in the country unlikely," end quote. Well, isn't that interesting? And then very shortly after that, we had what was considered an uprising, right? Now, Bashar was most popular among young people, at least according to Landis. They say Joshua Landis says they might not like the regime, they don't like corruption, but they tend to blame this on the people around him, the old guard. Okay, fine. Now, there's also this obsession with calling the Syrian government, or Assad's government, the Syrian regime, right? The Assad regime. Well, if that's corruption that makes you a regime, I guess we have the Obama regime, right? I guess we have the Cameron regime. I guess we have the Hollande regime. I guess we can call every government on the face of the planet a regime. If it's launching wars against their neighbors, I guess we can call that the U.S. regime. I guess we can call that the British regime. I guess that's the new nomenclature. Why is it the U.S. government but the Assad regime? Why is it the Obama administration but the Assad regime? That's a question that I'd like to hear the mainstream ask, why these two words are used in different contexts. Now, the people, they did want political change, of course, because of poverty. There was corruption. There was the political police. That was a problem. We're not going to deny that. But Assad also represented pluralism, and he supported modernity. He supported a lack of religious fundamentalism, right? The opposite of the death squads. Now, in the early days of his presidency, the popularity was shown, right? There were, in the early days of his presidency, the early days of the revolt, the early days of the destabilization. That's the proper language. And there were huge pro-government rallies that came out in response to the opposition rallies. And we even had Robert Fisk, and he was has some eye for detail there, but he says, this is what Robert Fisk writes: "Another pro-Assad rally was starting. It might have reached 200,000 by midday. There was no Saddam-style trucking of the people to Umayyad Square. The only soldiers were standing with their families. How does one report a pro-government demo during the Arab awakening? There were veiled women, old men, thousands of children. Were they coerced? I don't think so." Exactly, Robert. I agree. Mr. Fisk, he wrote that in 2011. Now, if you look at the history of violent conflict in Syria, and we're talking about internal violent conflict in Syria, it's almost always been between two sides, a pluralist state and then sectarian Islamists on the other side, right? And these Islamists are backed by big powers. They always have been. And the pluralist state has been represented by governments like the Assad government, whether it's, Hafez or Bashar. So this is the history of the Syrian internal conflict, where there is internal conflict. Now we have an Iraqi-British analyst, Sami Ramadani, who is a critic of the Syrian government. He always says that Syria's been run by a, quote, ruthless, corrupt regime with a feared security apparatus. And he also has to admit, because reactionary forces backed by Saudi Arabia and Qatar very rapidly took over from what he calls the democratic resistance, popular support shifted back to the government. That's what he says. Now, of course, yes, there were issues in terms, we talked about the political police and that sort of thing, and that there was a security apparatus that was feared. Absolutely. There was a security apparatus that was feared in Syria. However, the question of terrorist, essentially an Islamist, taking over from a democratic resistance. Well, there was no democratic resistance at all. It was piggybacking on maybe one small collection of people in the street, but it was violent from the word go. The very day of the protest, the first protest, there were snipers on the roofs. What democratic resistance is sniping at police, men, women, children, all and indiscriminately? There is no democratic resistance in that situation, Mr. Ramadani. I hate to break that to you. Now, he said that political support shifted back to the government. Well, yeah, it was always with the government, and that's where it stayed. It just reinforced it. Now, Ramadani would also say that he again, keep in mind, he was forced to admit that the rebels were reactionary forces. He was forced to admit that support was with the government. He was also forced to admit in his own articles that Syria is is not sectarian, and that it's not an Alawite regime. He was forced to admit that that was highly exaggerated, and he even said that that was highly exaggerated. He says the government, quote, had much wider circles of support, including influential Sunni classes and millions of women who fear the Salafis. Okay, they fear the Western-backed rebels because women in Syria know that they do not have rights under a government that is suitable to the West. You know, back here in the United States, while we talk about man-spreading and we talk about rape culture, non-existent rape culture, in Syria, women are now fearing for their lives if they don't wear a ridiculous costume because of a ridiculous religious law. They can be killed for that. But none of these dreaded feminists here have anything to say about that because they, well, we won't get into why they don't have anything to say about it. It's a long discussion. Many of the poor people and the unemployed and the students who were actually brought out as cannon fodder to fight against the Assad, to try to be used as cannon fodder in the color revolution since against the Assad government, as soon as they realized what they had gotten into with this Syrian National Council or the Free Syrian Army and the Muslim Brotherhood, they were having none of it. The younger people, the unemployed people, were actually looking for something that was probably much more socially liberal than the Assad government. Now, if anything, there was a lack of support for Assad. If there was a lack of support, it did not come from being an authoritarian. It came from not being enough of an authoritarian. We have, for instance, Kamil Ochragji saying that Assad lost many of his supporters in the first year of the violence because he was perceived as a weak leader who could not enforce his will on his security apparatus. Others felt he was not effective at mass communication, while some held him personally responsible for the high death toll. Basically, what they're saying, and this is the reports that we got early on, that the Syrian people weren't saying, oh my God, look at Assad killing his own people. No, that was the West. The Syrian people were saying, bring some damn tanks out here and kill these people who are sniping children on the way to school. That's what the Syrian people were calling. They were calling for more police. They were calling for the military to be brought out to deal with the West's so-called freedom fighters. So whatever problem was held with Assad, and we're giving this, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say that the average Syrian didn't like Assad. They were much less happy with the death squads. Right? There was a Turkish poll in 2011 that showed Syrians to be least positive in the region about the Arab Spring. And this was the Arab Spring as it was presented to them by the media. Remember here, it was presented as the golden youth, young people fighting for democracy and freedom and pluralism, totally the opposite of what it actually was. But the Syrians, only 22% of them thought that those events had a positive effect on the country, and 91% opposed them, opposed violent protests. So we have the people like Ramadani who would say that the support shifted back, but that is, of course, explaining things through the lens, really, of a Western audience who doesn't understand anything. That's the problem here. The Westerners are trying to rationalize the decisions and the statements of Syrians from their own perspectives, not from the perspectives of the Syrians. What I'm trying to get across here is that in order for Ramadani to understand what is happening in Syria, Assad must be an authoritarian. Rebels must be good. There must be a democratic protest. Syrians must have supported that democratic protest. To Ramadani, there is no ability to conceive of the fact that Assad was not the demon that he was painted to be, that the Syrian people never supported this idiotic so-called rebellion, and that the protests were violent from the word go. So in order for him to come to that conclusion, he has to do some twisting. He has to do some mental gymnastics. That's the psychological explanation. The other explanation is that he works for a mainstream media operation, and they tell him, you can't say that. And that's probably the more reasonable explanation. Mainstream media, I did an article myself on a former mainstream journalist who said that it was just impossible to get anything out there in the mainstream media that was contradictory to the narratives that were already pushed. And this is clearly the case. So we don't have much time left in the show, but we'll pick up on these type of talks in the future, as people seem to enjoy the more historical, contextual type of discussion here on the show. We'll keep doing that from time to time. Now, again, we need to in the last part of the show, I want to put out the call to action one more time. The Kratom bill. If you're in North Carolina, then please get active. If you're not in North Carolina, then still get active. But you can go to my article. North Carolina files bill to place Kratom on controlled substances list. Find the North Carolina senators on that list. Send them an email. There's a template there that if you can use that if you need it. You can call them, tell them the same thing, not to put Kratom on the controlled substances list. That's ridiculous. No more drug war. Back off. Do something productive. That's what the gist of the article or the email and statement needs to say. Also, if you're in Napa County, California, and you're listening to the show, June 7th, that's tomorrow, there is an election. James Hinton is running for County Board of Supervisors, District 2. He's been on the show a couple of times. He uses a lot of the platform points that I have promoted. So we encourage you to go out there and look at him. He's a real fighter. He's been fighting for clean food and individual rights, whether it's vaccine rights or constitutional gun rights, etc. He wants to raise the minimum wage, and he wants to nationalize the Fed. All of that. Go check him out. And again, he'll be on the ballot tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to keep putting these calls to action out, and I'm pleased with the results that I'm getting. The emails from the listeners letting me know what they're doing out there in the world, actually brick and mortar, talking to people individually, printing up flyers with the platform points on it. We've got other people doing some other very cool things that we'll talk about in the near future. And we'll discuss that as we go along. So keep the emails coming. Let me know what you're doing. And again, keep those platform points going out. Keep fighting on every point that you can. And we'll pick this up next week. We'll try to get some more historical discussion and some more action going there on the ground as well. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening